citizens of Austin, stay away from the university area. It's like a battle scene. It's like, there's another shot and another shot. There are two different kinds of shots. Apparently police are returning the fire now, which means there's a danger of ricocheting bullets off the university tower. There is a sniper on the university tower firing at will.
In a place steeped with history lies a story some would like to forget.
And we could hear the gunshots.
I heard somebody shout from the steps that someone was up in the tower shooting.
One of the worst shootings to ever happen on a college campus.
Anytime there's a major event that happens, law enforcement always tends to look and say, okay, what is it we can do to respond better to this in the future?
Time has changed so much on UT's campus, yet for those who survived, so much remains the same.
It totally changed my life.
This month marks the 50th anniversary of the UT Tower shooting. I'm Terry Gruca. On August 1st, 1966, the area around UT's tower was transformed into a place of fear and panic, a tragedy incomprehensible to a nation back then. Tonight, we'll hear from victims and those who managed to escape with their lives. At the core of the killing, a man with a dark past, a student turned mass shooter. We'll also look at how the shooting changed not only UT, but Austin forever. First tonight, it was a busy day on the UT campus. One recent high school graduate was making her first trip there, touring the tower. She had no idea she was about to become a part of history. Sometimes the simplest of times bring us the greatest comfort. Cheryl Botts Dickerson learned that at an early age.
And I think a lot of us need to be aware that every day's precious. You have no guarantee of tomorrow.
As a recent high school graduate, Cheryl and her date decided to take a tour of the UT Tower August 1st, 1966, a 30-minute adventure that neither knew would be life-changing.
We stopped and we spent an extra 5 to 7 minutes going back over and looking at the floor maps and comparing them, which probably saved our lives.
When they went back inside, they came face to face with the gunman now known around the world.
There was a movement to our right, and we turned, both of us turned to look, and at that moment, Charles Whitman turned around to face us. He had been bending over a couch, and he turned around to face us, and he had a rifle in each hand. We never stopped walking. We were talking and visiting. We stepped over the stain. We looked, and when he raised up, I smiled and said hello. And he smiled and said, hi, how are you? And then we just kept walking. Another thing that might have saved our lives, because we did not impede his progress.
Once downstairs, they go to the front of the tower and see a man laying face down in the grass and people crouched around the building.
And Don said, what's going on? And a man said, somebody is shooting at people from the tower. You don't know what to say. You just standing there in shock. And we could hear the gunshots. I don't know if it just hadn't registered how serious the situation was, you know? We went downstairs, we opened the back door, and at that exact moment, somebody got shot about 20 feet away from us and fell over. And Don said, we are not going anywhere.
Cheryl and her date were in shock, witnessing the first mass shooting on a college campus.
Everybody that was in the building all came down to the bottom floor. We were all sitting on the floor by the front door, and someone found a transistor radio. And we listened for the next hour and 20 minutes of everything that was going on.
Neither realized how close they came to death until days later.
It was such a shock that in the center of Austin, here's this tower, and the university is just the center of the city of Austin, or it was then. And for someone to intrude on that and to make the name University of Texas synonymous with the killing of so many people was just horrific. Nobody could fathom such a thing.
As a survivor, Cheryl felt an extra burden.
The two luckiest people in Austin that day is what they called us.
Do you believe that?
No, I don't believe it was luck by any stretch of the imagination. I was very thankful, obviously, that Whitman had not killed us. But you also have what I think they call survivor's guilt. Why were those 15 killed and I was not?
All these years later, Cheryl still shares her story for one reason.
I decided if my life was going to be spared, then I wanted it to be worth something. I was not going to waste it. So I worked very hard to be the best teacher I could be, to be the best mom, best wife.
A moment in history that forever shaped a young girl from Central Texas, one she hopes no one ever forgets.
You have no guarantee of tomorrow. You need to be prayed up, you need to be loved up, you need to make sure everybody in your family knows you love them, because you don't know if you'll get to see them tomorrow.
UT has more than 50,000 undergraduate students and more than 24,000 faculty and staff, making it the 7th largest single campus enrollment in the nation. And as the university has grown, so has the city around it. Brandon Jones has a look at how much has changed in 50 years.
For a few moments,
north of Austin,
take a trip with us down memory lane. The scene, the 1960s in Austin. The first modern skyscraper, the Scarborough Building, was a sight to behold. Now skyscrapers cover nearly every inch of Congress Avenue. Actor Adam West attended a premiere of the movie Batman at the Paramount Theater. And traffic? Well, some things haven't changed since the 60s. The 60s, a time when many believed America was on the brink of change.
You might say this is the Texas New Frontier capital here, this city of Austin.
The struggle for civil rights helped shape this era, the racial tension as clear as the Mason-Dixon line. You could even say food shaped things. Jorge Guerra and his wife Ninfa opened their doors to the El Azteca in East Austin in 1963. The Tex-Mex staples of tacos, enchiladas, and even barbacoa are just as iconic as the restaurant itself. Today, the 4th generation of Guerras are keeping the business going, but times have changed.
We weren't ready for this boom, and we're still not prepared for it, but it's happening.
Something drastic happened 3 years after El Azteca opened. This college town turned into a city and made history of the worst kind.
People really didn't know what was going on. It took them a long while for it to sink in.
That's Michael Barnes, a cultural reporter with the Austin American Statesman.
There really wasn't that kind of emergency preparedness. But psychologically, even more importantly, the city had not gone through anything like this.
The Austin Statesman and the Austin American covered the tower shooting tremendously. There were no fancy graphics, just photos of the stunned and hurt that day.
To give you some perspective here, the population within the city limits of Austin back in 1966 was a little over 218,000. That's around double the size of Round Rock today.
When the shooting happened, social media was non-existent. Fast forward 50 years, Twitter, Facebook, even UT's internal communication system would now warn the public if something was going on, just like it did when UT freshman Haruka Weiser was killed. School officials urged students to take every precaution available, including using one of these outdoor emergency phones around campus.
I think today we'd have more of a sense of the immediacy of the danger and where it was coming from because of social media.
There's no doubt all of Austin has changed. It's a prime example that a city can be tech-savvy, diverse, and most importantly, resilient. Brandon Jones, KVUE News.
One man changed dozens of lives on that fateful day in 1966. Why Charles Whitman was the last person anyone would have expected to be firing on random people. Plus, there were a handful of people who literally saved the day. Hear one account of how Whitman was stopped. When the gunman opened fire on the UT campus, there was a call for help, not just police, but the community at large. And one man is credited with helping end one of the darkest days on campus. In a place where education is celebrated, lie lessons no one should have to learn.
At the time, I didn't know the scope of it.
August 1st, 1966, police officer Ray Martinez was off duty when over the air he heard about a shooter on the UT campus.
He was saying, another shot, it sounds like a war.
Stay away from the university area.
He volunteered to come to campus to help.
I made up my mind that I had to get into the tower because I had to help stop the shooting.
He passed bodies and bullets.
I could see the top of the tower, and I figured that if I could see the top of the tower, he could see me.
Eventually, he made his way to the top of the tower, running into a civilian, Alan Crum.
And he said, "No, you're not going alone." And I said, "Well, come on." He says, "Okay, we'll do it service style. I'll cover you, you cover me." That's when I realized that he was not a police officer. And so I had a formal ceremony there. I said, "Consider yourself deputized." I said, "Aim your rifle at that wall, and if he comes around the corner, shoot him."
Martinez scaled the tower deck in search of the shooter.
I turned around and I looked back, and I saw Houston McCoy, a police officer, with a shotgun. Every once in a while you could hear, the chips come in there from lead or the rock.
Dodging dangerous and friendly fire.
There.
Alan Crum misfired.
Which drew the attention of Whitman.
Another blessing in disguise.
When I saw him, I opened fire. I could tell that I hit him because of the impact. You could see him react to it.
Martinez kept firing.
I put a bullet underneath the barrel, and I'm lucky because that thing was pointing to my gun.
50 years later, the gravity of that day isn't lost on Martinez. He knows how close he came to dying.
It made me appreciate life even more because that day, when I got home, I had the privilege and the honor to hug my wife and my two little girls. They were 2 years old, my twins, and be able to hug them and kiss them again.
There are some things time can't erase.
I hope that somehow or another we can curtail this violence in some manner.
Some lessons that still need to be learned. From Louisiana to Minnesota to Texas, Martinez hopes all of these are a call to action.
I want them to look around. I want them to get involved.
So that history doesn't repeat itself. One man forever changed the lives of dozens of people on that day in 1966, and he was the last person anyone would have expected to cause terror on campus. Chris Betts has the story.
It was a face and a name that would come to symbolize death and devastation. Charles Whitman, a quiet engineering student turned mass shooter who unleashed terror on the University of Texas.
Had been a student. It just nobody could understand.
Witness Cheryl Botts Dickerson describes Whitman, a married man, intelligent, raised a devout Catholic.
This was an Eagle Scout. This was a handsome young man. If you've seen his pictures, he was a good-looking young man.
According to those who knew the Whitman family, Charles' father had a heavy hand when it came to discipline, often hitting Charles and his two brothers. Whitman was taught to shoot early, and at the time he was also reportedly the youngest person in the world ever to become an Eagle Scout. After high school, Whitman would serve in the Marine Corps against his father's will, earning, among several accolades, a sharpshooter's badge. And it was during a Marine Corps scholarship program that Whitman would transfer to the University of Texas at Austin to study mechanical engineering.
This shooting spurred drastic changes to gun legislation and how police respond to these kinds of situations. The influence the tower shooting still has on officer training and how it shaped the views of guns on campus. And a memorial 50 years in the making, the permanent addition to the campus to commemorate the victims. UT would become the site of one of the first mass shootings in the nation's history. And in the years that followed, a lot of talk would surround gun safety, in particular guns on campus. KVUE's Jason Puckett with that story.
In the years leading up to 1966, Austin was a mostly peaceful, up-and-coming city. Law enforcement a good example of the city's laid-back nature.
A policeman's life is many things, but one of the main surprises we've found is the boredom. The hour upon hour of checking, patrolling, driving alone, with nothing to do but watch for trouble that may never come.
If the police motto is to protect and serve, officers then were doing more of the latter, directing traffic, managing crowds on UT game days.
What happens to you when you get a football game weekend?
Well, that is really a drain on our manpower.
and working hard to keep civil rights protests safe. Each officer on patrol equipped with their handgun and little else. It was an era of safety shattered in a day.
Students, co-eds crouched at the place where they could find safety.
Charles Whitman's reign of terror abruptly changing the reality. Austin police joining unarmed UT guards and quickly learning the protect part of their motto, creating the first ever plan to end an active campus shooting. In the days following, officials grasping, trying to fit this act of brutality into their world.
I am concerned, disturbed, and yet somewhat at a loss to know how you prevent a maniacal act of a man who obviously goes berserk.
Anytime there's a major event that happens, law enforcement always tends to look and say, okay, what is it we can do to respond better to this in the future?
Pete Blair is a criminal justice professor at Texas State and the executive director of ALERT, the Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training. He's spent his career analyzing shootings and putting together training simulations like this one.
Back then, as that was not even on the radar for people about that type of thing being possible. And now, unfortunately, that type of event is, people are aware of it.
Blair says the answer to Governor Connolly's question was training. Tactics for an active shooting didn't really exist in '66. The first developed plan was to surround the building. The 3 C's: contain, control, and call for SWAT. But that trapped the victims in the building with the shooter. Nowadays, it's on the patrol officers. They're trained to immediately engage the shooter, whether alone or in a group.
Since Columbine really is that officers go to the sound of the gunfire, they want to save lives, they want to stop anybody else from being harmed, and they're willing to put themselves in harm's way to do that.
So what would that mean on UT's campus today? Well, the first difference starts with the UT Police Department.
When it happened on campus, if you look at the University of Texas Police Department, didn't exist.
UTPD Assistant Chief Peter Sheets and Associate VP for Campus Safety Bob Harkins sat down with us to explain campus security 50 years after the shooting.
Everything has evolved since then. The training for police officers, how to respond to that type of situation, the tactics, have definitely evolved in terms of what our officers asked and expected to do.
On campus, they say it's now a multi-phase plan. Officers trained inside real campus buildings prepared to isolate and engage shooters.
Protection of life is the biggest priority.
And students have their own plans too. The focus, what UT calls the 5 outs.
Get out, call out, hide out, keep out, and then finally take out.
Students taught to avoid the shooter, alert authorities, and hide if possible, and if confronted, to defend themselves.
The final piece then be able to take out the individual, and there has to be a commitment to do that.
It's a frightening thought, students possibly fighting a shooter, but it was the reality on UT's campus back in '66. And Blair, Harkins, and Sheets all agree the only way to protect and serve is to prevent another such tragedy by training for any possibility. Jason Puckett, KVUE News.
Laws on campus are also changing. Texas Campus Carry went into effect on the day of the shooting anniversary. With it, new questions.
One of the things we talk about is to understand that when they're in that situation, they don't have anything to identify themselves as not being one of the bad guys.
Students, faculty, and staff are allowed to bring handguns into campus buildings if they have a concealed carry license. Guns are off limits in certain areas, including child care facilities, bars, and games. Open carry is still illegal. Since that dark day at UT, there have been 9 mass shootings at other colleges and universities across the country. On July 12, 1976, janitor Edward Charles Alloway shot and killed 7 people at California State University, Fullerton. 2 others were hurt. Then the world watched in horror as 33 people were killed in 2007 in the Virginia Tech massacre. And last year, 9 victims and the gunman died at Umpqua Community College. Including the UT shooting, 101 people have died in mass shootings at colleges and universities since 1966. More than 100 have been injured. The bullet holes still visible in concrete. The pain for some there that day still felt with heavy hearts. That's still to come.
It's just really real.
And she stared death in the face and lived to talk about it. But it took decades for her to return to the scene of that darkened UT. The UT Tower and main building loom large on the campus to this day. Not much has changed in the tower since the 1966 shooting. The university kept the tower observation deck closed for 2 years following the shooting and reopened it in 1968. Then it closed again in 1975 after a number of suicides. It would not reopen for 24 years. In 1999, the university installed an iron safety barrier around the observation deck. The university offers limited tours up to the top, but guests must pass through security before being allowed up. Until recently, the only memorial to the victims gunned down that day was a bronze plaque. It was small, and it wasn't until 1999, 33 years after the shooting, that the university dedicated the Tower Garden to those victims. In 2007, a bronze plaque was installed, but it didn't list any names. After years of waiting, a new memorial for those lost in the rampage opened up. Victims, along with state leaders and the university president, Gregory Fenves, unveiled a 6-foot memorial with 17 names etched into it.
I hope our community can collectively begin to shed those tears by remembering the tragedy of August 1st, 1966, that we can grieve publicly for the lives ended and honor the survivors and the heroes who helped save them.
For the many people who have come to the university who see these fallen, where they breathe their last, it will be reassuring and comforting. But truly, it's not the stone that we dedicate, but ourselves.
As part of the 50th anniversary service, the tower's clock stopped at 11:48 a.m., the time Whitman began shooting. On the campus that day, time stood still to remember all that was lost. There are moments in life that define us and others that inspire us. Many of the people who survived the UT Tower shooting know how close they came to death that day. And 50 years is what it took one woman to come back to the place where she nearly lost her life. 50 years seems like a lifetime.
Just an out-and-out miracle.
For Cheryl Botts Dickerson, it's taken that long to decide to go back to the place where she nearly lost her life.
I have not been back to the tower in 50 years.
She agreed to take that journey with us, unaware of the flood of emotions that would overcome her as she made it to the top. How are you feeling being up here?
I don't know. I guess it's just coming back more real or something.
It is in this room where she saw Charles Whitman.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting this.
Where they shared words.
It's just really real.
Where he let her and her date go. Austin looks much different now.
There's a lot of changes in 50 years.
The tower, too.
Of course, none of these bars were here. You know, they put them up in '98 when they reopened the tower.
But time can't erase everything. There's still evidence of what happened here 50 years ago. And for those like Cheryl who survived, the memories are as clear as if it happened yesterday.
I didn't know what to expect. But it's okay.
UT will forever be a place that gave her a second chance and purposeful perspective on life.
My family and my faith, that hasn't changed.
A second chance she will never take for granted. A second chance 16 people never got.